Coming up next on the Wet Fly Swing podcast.
If you protect your resources and you value them in a way that people can enjoy them sustainably, that's, I think, important to remember too. Well, you've just created an economic engine and an economic activity that can last for generations, if the people that enjoy it are involved in protecting it as well. So there's multiple benefits. And like I said, man, I've had a blast fishing for salmon and steelhead in the Great Lakes Tribs.
That was Patrick Berry with a strategy to get involved and assure sustainability this year. Fly casting instruction, fly tying tips and tricks, and conservation today on The Swing.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today.
Hey, how you doing today? Thanks for stopping by the show. We got a big giveaway we just launched this week. It's going strong right now. You can check it out. Go to wetflyswing.com/giveaway right now, and you can enter to win this big trip to the Steelhead School. This is Steelhead Alley with Jeff Liskay and Rick Kustich this year. It's going to be big. Heading to New York and Ohio this year. We have a good event going. So check it out right now. wetflyswing.com/giveaway. Today's episode is sponsored by Mavrk Fly Fishing. They make the lightest Euro nymphing reel in the world, which makes your rod more sensitive, casting more accurate, and you can hold your dead drifts longer without shoulder burn. Check out Mavrk Fly Fishing Stinger and their other Euro nymph products and support this podcast by heading over to wetflyswing.com/Mavrk right now. That's Mavrk, Mavrk, wetflyswing.com/Mavrk. Check out the lightest and most unique Euro nymphing reel right now. Established in 1928, Dette Flies is the oldest family-run fly shop in the world, now in their 94th year. Dette's mission has always been to supply the fly fishing community with the finest products and services. Every fly they sell is either tied in-house or by a handful of select domestic tyers. Please head over to wetflyswing.com/Dette to grab your in-house flies today. That's wetflyswing.com/Dette, Dette, to support this podcast and the oldest fly shop in the world. Patrick Berry takes us into Fly Fishers International and the resources you can utilize right now for fishing and for conservation. We discover where locally you can get involved in sustaining your fishing and your fishery. We find out which top national issues they are working on this year and some history to find out how it all started for Patrick and FFI. Plus, we get a William Shatner and Leonardo DiCaprio shout out. This is a fun one. Here we go. Patrick Berry from flyfishersinternational.org. How you doing, Patrick?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on, Dave.
Yeah, I appreciate you making some time, in your busy schedule to come on and talk a little about Fly Fishers International. The name, you guys, along with a few others, probably, I think Trout Unlimited is another big conservation group. You guys come up a lot, and I've had Len Zickler on back in episode 95. We'll have a link to the show notes to that as well. So I'm excited to get an update on what you guys have going, because you're huge out there in the fly fishing space and conservation. But before we jump into all that, let's take it back real quick to fly fishing, because I know you have a lot of experience there as well. How'd you get into fly fishing, and kind of what's that first memory?
My experience and journey was probably like a lot of people, where I didn't necessarily start with a fly rod. When you have really old memories in life, they're like little Polaroid snapshots in your mind. I don't know if that makes sense, but my first three memories in life were of fish and fishing. And I thought that I had dreamt it until I remembered asking my folks about it, my parents. And, I could tell you about that, but I have this vivid memory. When I grew up, we just didn't have a whole lot. And we actually went on a camping trip, and my father made fishing rods out of sticks, string, safety pins for hooks, and we dug up worms. And wow. I remember I have this vision of a sunfish on the bottom of a tin boat. And my recollection is that it was this huge lake. What's so funny, Dave, is I've since been back, and it's this little pond. I think I was like 3 years old. Anyway, I've always been really just fascinated by fish, and I would fish for carp with dough balls. I didn't care, man. I just wanted something on the end of my line. And, that sort of led into fly fishing. And I had played, competitive sports, and I went to college to play sports, and ended up really screwing my back up my freshman year playing football. And I suddenly had all this free time in the afternoons that was always taken up by practice. And I just went fishing all the time. I had this really beat up, I think it was a big one. It was like a 17-foot aluminum Grumman canoe that had been shot with a shotgun a couple times. So millions of little pellet holes I was constantly trying to patch to keep the thing from sinking. And I was in college in Vermont, and, I hadn't really discovered trout yet, but I kind of had an idea where they lived. And, I gotta give props to Tom Rosenbauer at Orvis, who's since become a friend. But, I remembered reading his early books, which still stick with me, some of what I learned to this day. Anyway, so some guy who was from Colorado knew I fished in the afternoons and weekends a lot, mostly for bass and pike and stuff like that with conventional gear. And he said, "Hey, man, do you know where there's any trout?" And I said, I have a pretty good idea where I think there are some decent fish. So I took him down to this one section of river not too far from campus. And, I was above in this plunge pool, and he was down through these sort of riffles and rapids. And every time I turned around, he had on a big trout or was landing a big trout. And I thought, and that was it right there. I mean, I immediately went and bought a total garbage fly rod at the hook and bullet store in town that basically had like one fly rod. And I don't think I just became obsessed with, it's a, story a lot of people have, right? Where I can tell you exactly where I caught my first trout, the fly that I used, the drift that I made, the excitement that I had, just really got me rolling from there. And so, then I picked up, fly tying, and I wanted to learn more about the bugs and how to fish. And so, bought books on entomology, and, anyway, it just, those were the very beginnings. And again, probably similar to a lot of people, but it's just something about it that just really caught my attention and my imagination, frankly. The mystery of trout was just, God, it was just this world, they live under the water and they eat insects, and you got to figure out what they're eating and solve this puzzle. And that's true to this day, but it's that magic and mystery that I think caught my attention.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. I think the planting the seed of, it seems like, a lot of people have that first, maybe sometimes, like you said, it's your dad with the rod, putting the rod together, and then it's that person in college who kind of showed you trout, right? And then you're there. And it sounds like you have that you not only fly fishing, but it sounds like everything you do, you kind of take it to the highest levels, because you've got this conservation work that you've been doing. And I know you've got some experience even before FFI, working in conservation. So was that something you studied in college? Was the conservation track always a focus, or the fisheries, all that stuff?
Well, first, I want to acknowledge, you're right. I am that kind of person where I dive into something, and, I'm not... If we're being honest, nobody's the best at anything. Like, everybody always has something to learn, and someone's out there is always better than you at what you think you're really good at. But it's the interest that, wanting to be proficient at something is what often drives me, so whether it's fly fishing or, I train spaniels, for hunting and field trials, nationally competitive kind of thing. And we all have hobbies like that, we dive into. But the conservation focused actually was another typical story about what happens when you start to fly fish. As Lee Wulff said, every time you teach someone to fly fish, you've just created a new conservationist. And that's really the link. And, after, trout bumming for a while, classic, after I got out of college, lived in the back of my truck, which was the biggest piece of crap.
What was it? What was the truck?
Oh my God, it was awesome. It was a 1977 two-wheel drive Dodge Prospector.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah. The only thing about it that was valuable is that it was the old, the original Dodge 318 engine, so I could actually fix it when it broke down in the middle of nowhere, which, by the way, happened in the middle of nowhere, but near the Green River in Flaming Gorge, Utah. But the entire exhaust system was put together with beer cans and coat hangers. And one window didn't go down, the other didn't go up. It was anyway. So I kind of did the whole trout bump thing, ended up running out of money, living in my truck in Jackson, Wyoming. And I was like, well, darn it, I'm going to have to get a job now. And so funny and coincidental, my first job in a fly shop was with Jeff Currier.
Oh, it was.
Oh, yeah. So, and we're still buddies to this day.
Right. Back at the old, who was the guy on that shop?
Well, it was the Jack Dennis outdoor shop. But anyway, so, I kind of went through that progression, and, I got to this place where I'd been doing some commercial tying and got into some guiding and instruction and all that, but I just felt like I wanted to do something more that was kind of a parallel track to being involved in fly fishing. And that's when I really shifted to conservation. And frankly, reading Aldo Leopold Sand Canning Almanac was an incredibly important moment, or not moment, but sort of a time where it just connected with me on so many levels that I ended up deciding to go to graduate school for in environmental science, and ended up going to University of Montana in Missoula and doing my master's work there in environmental science with a focus on, freshwater ecology and fisheries. And that's really when my conservation focused career took off.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. And then I think after that, did you head back? When did the Vermont, I think you headed back there, right, for a while?
Yeah. So, I went to college in Vermont, which is actually the same town that Middlebury, where my wife was born and raised, although she went to a different school. So, of course, it's super fun for all my buddies to tell me I married a townie. And anyway, so, I had this connection, we had this long connection here to Vermont. We lived in Missoula for a while. I was a full-time guide while I was going to school, 140, 150 days a year, which is plenty. Thank you very much.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, when we were in Montana, which of course we loved, but Brooke, my wife, she just missed her home. And I love it here in Vermont as well. And so we decided to come back, which was confusing for all of my buddies out there in Western Montana, because they're like, why would you ever leave this place? Which is let's just be honest, Dave, it's a fair question.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So, I ended up coming back to Vermont. I worked for the Vermont Natural Resources Council, which was the affiliate for the National Wildlife Federation, and became the legislative and policy director on some really important conservation and environmental quality issues, that extended, beyond what you might think is a focus on trout. I ended up gaining a lot of experience in fundraising, and, worked at Vermont Law School as the director of governmental affairs and director of their fundraising for their environmental law center, which was the top environmental law center in the country. And then from there, ended up being appointed by the governor as the head of Vermont's Fish and Wildlife Department. And that was, boy, do I have some stories about that.
Right.
But an incredible experience. And I'm really, really proud of my time there and what we're able to accomplish in terms of, conservation. And I think we got the department in a really good place, and updated a lot of really important laws and regulations, and including, things that people don't necessarily think about, like declaring fish and wildlife resources in the public trust. In other words, owned by everybody, not by an individual. And at the time, I think we were only the second state that had taken that extraordinary step to declare those fish and wildlife resources in the public interest. So anyway, there's a lot of history and a lot of stories there. But there's a few other stops along the way with my career, but those are the highlights, I suppose.
That's cool. Yeah, no, and we might circle back around on some of that. So, but let's go into, Fly Fishing International and kind of maybe do a broad brush stroke of what you have going, since, it's been quite a while since we talked to Len. And so let's give an update. So I know we've got the history there. You guys have this really cool history, but what's your take on conservation? Like, what are you focusing on? What are people that don't know about FFI or the details? What would you tell them?
I see FFI as the organization that is available to guide people on their fly fishing journey, no matter what their skill level is, or where they live, or what fish is their favorite thing to chase after. We started out with a focus on conservation, education, and community back in the 1960s when the organization was founded, and we've stayed true to our roots to this day. Our biggest strength area really is in, high quality fly fishing education supported by our conservation work. So, as this stuff, Dave, but just for the listeners, the Casting Instructor Certification program at FFI is considered the premier, casting instructor program in the world. And that's what a lot of people know about FFI, but may not know that there's a whole suite. Let's just take casting, for example, of casting activities from the very beginner to the most advanced, which you can, check out the resources we have online. We've got, a ton of really great how-to videos, that can meet anybody's needs through, our own learning portal we have online. We've got 250 clubs in a huge geography that, where there's a culture of mentorship and teaching and a lot of distinct education programs that complement fly casting, so obviously fly tying, fly fishing skills, and conservation. When you go to the portal where you can learn, whatever you want to know about fly fishing, it's casting, tying, skills, and conservation, those four. So conservation, is on an equal level. So, even though I think we perceive of ourselves as really, having our sweet spot in fly fishing education, conservation is a critical part of that fly fishing education. And we focus a lot of effort and energy on working with our conservation partners to, help support the work that they do, while also providing our own conservation grants for worthy projects that align with our goals of what we would love to see happen in protecting and restoring fisheries habitat.
That's perfect. Yeah, I love that. That's a great summary. So conservation is right along. And I think when I first heard about FFI, I think it was the FFF, right? Federation of Fly.
That's right.
Before it changed. So, but yeah, I thought of that, and I heard all the stories about the casting, and I even tested it out for a while. I went into I think I took the first series of that program, and it's pretty cool because what you hear from people that have gone through it is that you realize a couple things when you get into it, that you're not as good of a caster as you thought you were. You're right. And that's part of the program. But yeah, you guys are at the top of the game as far as this certification, which is cool. But today, I want to focus on the conservation piece because we're doing this event in the Great Lakes. And part of this, I always come in thinking like, we're doing this cool thing. We're giving away a trip to go out to the Great Lakes to go steelhead fishing. But I always want it to be with the backdrop of like, okay, remember, we've got some things going on out there, the conservation, the issues. And right now is like, do you feel like right now is one of those times where it just feels like there's so much going on and maybe it could even be a negative thing because of the planet, right? What's your take on that? Just looking broad. This is really broad, but
sure.
You know what I mean? Like, what is your take when you see everything going on right now? Climate change, it seems like things are warmer. I've had many guests talk about how, brook trout are going away. There's nothing we can do about it, right? I mean, stuff like that. What's your take there?
I think that we are in the midst of a crisis that is unfortunately not universally understood or accepted, and really good science has, been overshadowed by the politics of environmental issues and how people view that. I don't understand how you can put your head in the sand based on the incredible changes we're seeing globally, whether it's the crazy floods we've had here in Vermont, which has been on national news. I mean, a once in 1,000 year rain event, which, obviously doesn't happen that often, but certainly, 5 and 10 year flood events are happening on a more regular basis. I'm just saying, where I live. And then you look at the extreme heat in parts of the United States and around the world. Obviously, you look at the melting, ice caps. I mean, it's a crisis to the point where if we don't get a handle on this, we're really going to have to pivot from mitigation to adaptation. And clearly, I think we're already in adaptation mode. And unfortunately, realizing that a warming climate actually has significant effects all on its own because of how it impacts other pollutant sources, which may become more harmful as the weather warms
Right.
because of the changes in sort of chemistry, ability for nutrient loading, ability for waters to hold oxygen, nutrient cycling, all the different factors that go into this, all the ingredients that, are the recipe for healthy fisheries are completely out of balance right now. So it's a huge worry. To the point of about brook trout or toast anyway. I don't blame anybody who is feeling, that sort of sense of hopelessness.
Yeah.
But I can't go through life thinking that way, right? So,
No.
I'm trying to focus on what we can do to help with mitigation and adaptation. And, listen, we were fortunate with the conservation either at a state and federal level, for a lot of different land, like, take the national forest. In fact, I'll just use, my home state of Vermont as an example, which, I'm sure there's an analog in Oregon, where, Green Mountain National Forest protects the headwater streams where these brook trout live. I can still, go up into the mountains and catch these little, 4 to 10 inch jewels native brook trout in, heavily, big canopies for protected forests, cold water, that pours out of the mountains. I mean, I happen to live across the road from a pretty natural wild trout fishery, but those examples are anecdotal and they're limited. And what I mean by that is, sure, there are places I can give you examples where the landscape has been protected to support the habitat necessary for sensitive fish species like brook trout, which, by the way, reminder too, that, it was 20 years ago when we were talking about the effects of acid rain from power plants in the Midwest, having a serious negative effect on, wild and native fish in the Adirondacks and then over into parts of southern Vermont. So, we've been kind of trying to run away from pollutants affecting cold water fisheries habitat for a while. So anyway, I can give you an example of that. But there's a reality, too, where all of these factors are interconnected. And, I'm sure you and your listeners are following what's happening right now on the Big Hole and the Jefferson drainage in Montana. And I'm pretty certain they're going to find that a continually warming climate has as much to do with the impacts because, yes, there is nutrient loading that they've discovered they need to deal with. But again, that's exacerbated by those elevated temperatures consistently over time.
Right. The Big Hole, is that remind us again what species are involved in that?
So that's a great question. And here are some of the challenges too, is that you're mostly talking about rainbow and brown trout, which are not native species. However, whitefish are. And so, I think it's fair to say the state of Montana has been too slow to act in addressing what they have seen coming as declining fish numbers, this year reaching the all-time low point, which, has created a sense of urgency more than probably previous years. But when you're talking about impacts on native whitefish, and by the way, reminder to everybody, as I understand it, it is the last place where you can find grayling in the lower 48 states, which also require cold, clean water too. I think we often forget that brown trout and rainbow trout in certain parts, well, brown trout anywhere in the country, but certainly rainbow trout in certain parts of the country, and this is what gets me, I understand they're not native fish, but they are an incredibly important indicator of overall watershed health.
Right.
And just because those populations are declining, even if they're not native, shouldn't be any kind of reason to ignore what's an urgent situation. Because if they're on the decline, you've got water quality problems that you've probably let get away from you.
Today's episode is sponsored by Trxstle, who has earned an exceptional reputation over the past few years in the fly fishing industry due to the popularity of their telescopic fly rod roof racks and statement-making artist series apparel lines. Their latest release for 2023 is the Gerion Universal Bike Rack Packing System, a brand new way to transport your fly fishing and outdoor gear. The Gerion will give any modern bike the ability to bring 30 pounds of gear with its front and rear articulated racks, Whether you ride a full suspension mountain bike, an e-bike, or even a carbon fiber road bike, the Geryon will get you and your fishing gear further faster and have much more fun along the way. I can tell you this has been a big struggle for me. I've been riding my bike, both road bikes and mountain bikes, and had lots of issues over the years packing my gear, whether that's crappy storage on the back or a trailer that's just too big and bulky. So I'm excited to share this packing system, which is going to make it way more convenient and accessible to get out to the places you need to go. You can learn more about how Trxstle is transforming the way you access your favorite water, backcountry hunting zones, and camping spots. Head over to wetflyswing.com/Trxstle right now and be the first on the water and the farthest upstream and away from the crowds. That's Trxstle, Trxstle. Trxstle, live your pursuit. We've heard some of those stories too, just like down on the South Fork of the Snake, where, you've got rainbow, and I think they're removing, they've got a bounty on rainbow to try to get back to those, the native populations of the cutthroat. And that's a whole debate there as well. But yeah, so, I think it's hard, the thing I don't want to do is make this a downer episode, right? Because I think that's a lot of the thing. I think people, when they talk about conservation, I think that's maybe why conservation podcasts struggle, because people don't want all the downer. They want to be uplifted. So I feel like, there are some opportunities for people to do some things. What is your recommendation? Somebody's listening now. They really want to do something. They want to be part of the solution, not part of the just, the downer stuff. What do you tell them? They can get involved with you guys. What's your recommendation if somebody's somewhere in this country or around the world?
I'm so glad you asked that question. And I'll just tell you why real quick. I think one of the failings of the climate change movement in general, Dave, is that, there's not an entity in a leadership capacity that has provided information for how your average person can make a difference when it comes to climate change. The discussion becomes about, policy, right? And what we should do.
Right. Policy and politics.
Right. Right. And instead of saying, here's what you can do as an individual. And when it comes from, an environmental organization or a conservation organization, is viewed differently than if it comes from, sort of a state agency of sort of environmental conservation, or even at the federal level. You don't have to agree on this stuff. So, I think where we've gone wrong on getting your average person involved in climate change issues in general, I do think that, the conservation focused organizations, around water quality and fisheries have provided good pathways for getting involved. And there's a continuum, right? First thing you can do is, join organizations that support the things that you care about. Even if you feel like you're too busy or you're not sure how to get involved in your area, listen, Fly Fishers International is non-competition with anybody, right? we complement the work that other organizations do. And I've known Chris Wood since college, and he and I are still buddies. He's a head of Trout, president and CEO of Trout Unlimited. And I told Chris, I'm like, listen, man, we're promoting joining Trout Unlimited, which I know some people think is insane because we want people to join FFI.
Yeah.
But I want people to join the Bonefish and Tarpon Trust and the Everglades, support the Everglades Foundation, and save the boundary waters, and efforts to save Bristol Bay. And I understand those are, I've just named some super high profile issues, but that's how people want to connect. Support those folks, right? To me, that's your entry level, right?
Yep.
I think what's compelling for a lot of people is to find a local FFI club or TU chapter and get involved in some way. Almost, every one of those clubs and chapters are going to have some really compelling conservation issues they're working on at a local level. It might be a stream cleanup, which doesn't sound like conservation, but that is an incredible way to begin to instill an enduring conservation ethic that will live with people. I think I'm a good example of that as well, because, I started, little bits, becoming, joining organizations, getting involved. And the next thing you know, I'm, in graduate school working on these issues, which I realize is not, necessarily everyone's path in life. But I do think that, from that joining and supporting these clubs to, getting involved on the local level, which feels rewarding, right?
Yeah.
You cast a line in the place that you help clean up, protect, restore, whatever. That's really rewarding. But, there are also these high profile national and global issues. And man, you've always said the world is run by people who show up. And, if you have the opportunity to, support something positive or fight, bad stuff, at the regulatory level, or, a project that may impact your area. I mean, whether it's a mining operation, let's say,
Right.
around Trxstle Bay or whatever, it doesn't take that much time to write to your elected officials at the local, state, and national level. And that stuff matters over time, to show up at a hearing and voice your opinion on what matters. And frankly, I think it can feel pretty rewarding. And I could give plenty of examples where those efforts, sort of the good news side of things, Dave, those efforts made a difference.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I love that. I think that's the first step, is getting involved locally, because it's this visceral connection. You're in your own water, you're doing stuff, and now you can keep scaling that up, right, to different things. And who knows, right? Maybe they become like you, and you get into it even deeper, or right. And then, but I think also the writing letters is a really powerful thing, because those elected people, listen to their constituents, right? If they get letters, that's for sure they're not going to just not listen. For the my guess is most people are reading those letters. So this is amazing. I think that I always think about, again, how do I stay positive on this? I always think of stuff like Rachel Carson, back in the day, because we had this period of time where plenty of rivers around the country were so polluted that fish couldn't even live in them. And Rachel Carson was Silent Spring, right? All that stuff, the DDT. I mean, so we do see improvements. I mean, this stuff does work. We see the Atlantic salmon around the world. There are places where we're doing some things. So I feel like, there is a lot of positive stuff. I think that a lot of people think like, well, maybe now things are so crazy because of climate change that it's changed the game. I don't have the answer to that. I mean, what would be do you kind of look at that way, where you look at these examples of positives that you've seen happen, and that's what keeps you going?
You want to know what gives me the most hope, Dave?
Yeah.
This upcoming generation of millennials care deeply about issues, and they care, and listen, it may be social justice. It may be, something that, isn't necessarily directly connected to what you feature, on this podcast. But conservation and environment is one of the things that they care about. And, it's one of the reasons that FFI is beginning to really change some messaging and focus, realizing people care about this stuff. And, you get excited to flip through your social media feeds and look at grab and grin shots and be like, oh my God, I'd love to catch a golden Dorado or a,
right. Yeah. Atlantic salmon.
Right. Yeah, sure. Some exotic species. Like, I mean, who wouldn't want to catch an arapaima on a fly, right? But, that's got to be complemented with, I think, news and information in a way that people, learn and are willing to accept the message that you're trying to get out there about the things that matter. And in my opinion, there's not just hope from this upcoming, generation where, sure, older folks love to sort of roll their eyes at the habits of millennials necessarily.
Right.
But like it or not, they're the future. So you can either roll your eyes or you can embrace the things about, that generation where there's value. And frankly, that sense of purpose and passion about issues, that's really important. That is going to be what I think helps make a big difference as we move forward. And there are two ways to look at what you could do. There is responsibility and there's opportunity, right? A lot of times we think to ourselves, yeah, well, there's an opportunity to make sure that we're, instilling this enduring conservation ethic with our audience, right?
Yeah.
But I think that we've crossed a boundary where now we have a responsibility. And the one thing I really appreciate about, not just what we're doing with our conservation partners, like, Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership and TU, et cetera. But, the American Fly Fishing Trade Association has their own fisheries fund and is very conservation focused. And, I'm fortunate enough, Dave, to be on the board of AFTA. And I've been really heartened by, what people say behind closed doors might be different than what they, espouse in public. Oh, sure, we care about fisheries, habitat, and conservation. But man, these folks do. The folks at, manufacturer, retail, guide, and outfitter level, that are, involved in AFTA, they live and breathe this stuff. So when you've got industry leadership taking up the mantle of responsibility, not just opportunity, on focusing on conservation. A rising generation that is very issue focused and cares about the issues that you and I are talking about. And clubs and councils from organizations like Fly Fishers International, Trout Unlimited, CCA, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers all have a conservation focus. So I just feel like there is a continuum within, sort of the outdoor activity community focused on conservation that gives me hope. And frankly, those are the dudes I want and the gals I want to hang around with, because we're all, pushing the rock in the same direction.
Right. Yeah, we're working together on this thing. That's good. Well, let's talk on FFI, maybe talk about, some programs, what you have going. I mean, I know there's plenty going in the Great Lakes, but what would be your high level when you look at this? I'm not sure how the planning, strategic planning, stuff like that works, but what's your focus over like the next year or so from FFI perspective on the conservation end?
So on the conservation end, we've been focused on a lot of, the high profile issues that your guests, know about, right?
Yeah.
So, protecting the Alaska wilderness, the Tongass National Forest. We put in a lot of time and effort on the effort to remove the Snake River dams and restore salmon and steelhead habitat. The over 200,000 acre Rainy River watershed and the boundary waters, is under threat from surface mining. All of those types of issues. I mean, those continue. I mean, what I see is some incremental success stories that are worth celebrating. And by the way, as a community, and the environmental and conservation community in general is awful at taking the time to celebrate a small victory. Listen, the fight continues, but if you don't stop and sort of
Right.
nourish your soul with what you may have accomplished on some level, to your point, like, it's kind of hard to keep getting excited about this stuff, right? So, there is good news, right, on those three issues that I just mentioned, in addition to, what's happening with Pebble Mine. And listen, man, we don't do politics at FFI, but people should pay attention to where good and bad environmental policy comes from, and, where those threats come from, because frankly, that stuff matters a lot, again, on, local, state, and national level. So we're going to continue putting our shoulder to the wheel, on those kinds of issues. Again, we really, value the synergy of working with conservation partners and how we can come together, creating, one voice among dozens of outdoor hunting, fishing related, organizations that are all working together towards these issues. And, when you end up with, a really strong coalition working on an important issue, it builds momentum for your activities, efforts, and success moving forward. And it gets to feel like, 1 + 1 = 3 or 4, not 2. So, that's our goal moving forward, is to continue to provide conservation grants at the local level for, oftentimes our clubs and councils. We've provided a lot of funding for Science on the Fly. I would love what they do and love their approach and focus. And then continue, again, to work with aligned conservation partners on the issues that all of your listeners, hopefully, most of them, are sort of tracking and paying attention to and are caring about.
That's right. Where could somebody go right now that's listening that maybe doesn't know all the things that are going on with the issues out there? Is there a place on your website or somewhere where they can say, okay, here's the big issues that I should get involved in around the country, world?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you go to flyfishersinternational.org and click on conservation, we've actually just upgraded our website, and the information on conservation. I'm so glad you asked that, because we realized how much people valued learning about conservation. Now,
Right.
Obviously, they may not want to dig into rulemaking, and it's overwhelming, and it's easy to get lost in the weeds. But, I think we've got some really good high level information on a lot of these, sort of increased profile types of issues. And again, listen, I'm all about supporting our colleagues and partners. So, whether it's depending on where you live, right? So, whether it's, Bonefish and Tarpon Trust or Trout Unlimited or, CCA, I mean, Save the Boundary Waters. I mean, there's a way to get information from those local organizations. And because I think we've done a good job, and I think sort of the fisheries conservation and fly fishing space of working together, there's a lot of information sharing as well. So folks won't necessarily, hopefully, I would assume they wouldn't get competing information about what's going on and what's important, because I think we're all in alignment on these issues. And I say we, meaning, the organizations that focus on this stuff.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I love that you started that off with the, giving money to the local groups, right? Empowering the local groups. I've heard that quite a bit from, people in the conservation space, that including like Patagonia, where that's kind of the same thing they're doing, right? They're giving, they know that, it's better to go, right from that end and like let the local groups focus and protect their areas, and then that works its way up. Yeah, and I think one thing I was thinking about as you were talking there, I was just listening to a podcast, on the Outside podcast, right? Which is they had William Shatner on. And it got me thinking, because of course William Shatner is this kind of famous person, and but he was talking about how he did. I don't know if you remember this, but remember he did the Jeff Bezos. He took the rocket up into space. Yeah, and he came down and he cried. He was crying when he came off of it, and I was listening to him talk about it, and it was partly because he was realizing these issues we're talking about the planet, right, and all this stuff. But Bezos on that said that there's a couple things that came from me that, Bezos said, like, part of, I guess, his thing is he's thinking, well, if we can get the polluters out into space, right? So you got these big tech things. That's one thing there, right? So I think maybe a lot of people that maybe are deniers, they think that way. They think, hey, tech, we're going to solve this problem, and maybe we will, whatever. Also on that would be William Shatner. How much do you think it's important to have people like William Shatner, famous people out there, talking for the conservation? Do you see that as an important thing? I guess there's a couple questions there.
It's a double-edged sword, frankly, because honestly, when you have, celebrities working on issues that are important, I think it can inspire their fan base. And even if they're not inspired to take action, like, Leonardo DiCaprio might, they can at least still accept it as something that's important, right? And so when you go out with your buddies, or, you go to a dinner party or whatever, and maybe the topic of sort of politics and environment and conservation come up, maybe a William Shatner espousing, the value of conservation and his concerns about, protecting, we got one planet, right? Let's not screw this up. Maybe people won't be so passive and they'll be willing to accept that, right? That's the one side. On the other side too, it just has become such an easy knee-jerk reaction to say, well, of course, these Hollywood types are all about these, crazy liberal causes. What's wrong with them?
Oh, right. Yeah. So again, politics comes up again all the time.
Oh, it's a bummer, man.
Right.
I mean, obviously I was involved in it because I worked for a governor, but it's just, to me, it's tragic, and that's a bad news story we won't get into, Dave. But listen, I'm ecstatic when you have well-known, either celebrities or luminaries, focusing on those things that are important, like protecting the planet. My opinion, the benefits far outweigh, any negatives.
Yeah, that's right. And what's your take on the tech thing? I guess that's probably so far out there, but do you guys get involved in any of that? Think about that at all? The fact that there might be some technology that helps kind of where we're going in this crisis we have?
I kind of worry that while we have the technological knowledge, it's at this point, it's about using that technology to adapt. And, technology isn't going to reverse, over 100 years of, greenhouse gas emissions, beginning with the Industrial Revolution. I mean, it is pretty remarkable what it is that we are able to accomplish with technology. But again, it's limited. And I always have a concern about the message that it sends when people believe so much in the value of technology. It's kind of like, I don't even know if you want to go down this road, man, but it's kind of like, stocked fish or not stocked fish, right? You can argue it either way. And just to give an analogy without, like diving into that, I mean, one of the challenges of stocking fish is that people go and catch fish and they develop, they're probably not paying attention to, they just,
No.
They worked hard all week. They got a little bit of time. They take their kids out. Like, I don't blame them at all for they go out and enjoy it. And it creates a false assumption of water quality that can support a cold water fishery as these fisheries are declining. And my question is, well, isn't there value in people learning that, no, there's no place for you to go catch fish with your kid because we've really hammered these watersheds to the point where they can't sustain fish. Now, I understand there's another side of it. That's how I feel about technology, right? There's this assumption that we've developed enough technology about, saving energy, mitigating pollution, turning pollution or waste into some kind of quality product that people are like, oh, well, we got this covered because we're smart and like all these really smart people are, going to figure out how we, dig ourselves out of this hole. That, I would say that's the, I don't know, downside, I guess.
Yeah, that's the problem is that I think that is the problem, that people feel that and then like, well, I don't really have to do anything because, the tech's going to take care of it. But, the thing is that, wow, yeah, what if they don't? And it's way better to have people involved and engaged doing things. So that's great. Well, I love that you mentioned stock too, because I think that's a perfect segue into, our Great Lakes Steelhead School.
Yep.
Because it's interesting, I think things have evolved like everything, but, steelhead is obviously a West Coast species. It was transplanted over to the Great Lakes, and now they release like 1.6 million steelhead into Lake Erie, right? And it's an amazing program. I mean, we had Chagrin River Outfitters on. They were like, he said himself, he wouldn't have a fly shop if it wasn't for the steelhead program. And so you've got this stuff going on, but at the same time, they're not native fish. Maybe there's other native fish. So I don't know. I mean, that's like when you hear that whole thing, I mean, what's your take on that? I guess just generally, what's your thoughts on the steelhead program there? And do you feel like that's a good thing, bad thing? Do you have an opinion there?
I do. Well, yeah. And it's, what it is, Dave, it's the other side of the question, right? So, I just gave you the reason why, I have concerns about what the message that it sends to your average person about the quality of the water resources around them. But the flip side is, and again, you can argue both ways, is it gets people outside and enjoying the resource. And, hey, I have enjoyed the heck out of fishing for steelhead out of the Great Lakes. And, including, in the winter in blizzards where I probably had no business being out there. And, you see people lining the rivers and, I don't necessarily like fishing around, other people. You know what? Everybody was out there together. They were courteous. No one was casting over each other's line. If someone hooked up a fish, they got out of the way. And what I saw was that, the steelhead fishery, whether, stocked or not, I know it's stocked, right?
Yeah.
It created this community of people who enjoyed getting outside and, which beats the heck out of, having them go play golf. My gosh, you know what I mean? Right.
Yeah.
And frankly, I do think that it gets people involved, caring about the resource and how that begins to develop a stronger conservation ethic that translates into other issues in other areas. So, you got people out on the water because of a resource that, you've been supplementing, right, with stocked fish, right? But there are tremendous benefits, beyond that in a person's journey along the fly fishing path. And then, to your point too, I mean, it is undeniable the economic driver and the economic benefits generated by fisheries that are supported by hatcheries. And, when I was the head of Vermont's Fish and Wildlife Program, the legislature was looking at closing or gutting some of the hatcheries we had. And, fortunately, we had some excellent data from, studies and surveys, including U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, about the economic value and the economic engine, especially, like the Great Lakes, right? Okay, where I am, I'm in Vermont, right? You're talking about small towns, many of which in that particular area of the upper Midwest, maybe industry left years ago, they've been struggling. And what a great opportunity to begin to at least replace some of that economic activity in those communities with something that is about enjoying, this resource rather than exploiting this resource. I mean, that's the big problem with, when people talk about like pick a potential impact, right? A mine along a river, right, has a shelf life. And sure, you might have a job in the mine for a little while, but at some point that's going to go away. But if you protect your resources and you value them in a way that people can enjoy them sustainably, that's, I think, important to remember too. Well, you've just created an economic engine and an economic activity that can last for generations, if the people that enjoy it are involved in protecting it as well. So there's multiple benefits. And like I said, man, I mean, like I've had a blast fishing for salmon and steelhead in the Great Lakes Tribs, again, with my buddies in a community of people. And, we stayed in the local, there's like rooms behind the fly shop. And I also have a rule. I have a rule too, which, I hope your listeners will follow this also. If I go into a fly shop, and so great example, right? This is a fly shop, near on the Pulaski, New York, right? Tributary of Lake Erie. And I go in there and I get information. Hey, wondering, like I'm like everybody else, right? Hey, wondering, what's fishing, what sections are fishing well, they're, what do you got in the river? What do they eat and all that stuff. And if the folks in the shop say, you know what, they're eating these flies right here, and I like to use this leader here, et cetera. Mm-hmm. I don't care if I have 100 of that exact same fly and 50 leaders, I'm going to buy them anyway, because that's the way we support those local businesses. They provide you with information, support, and encouragement, and we buy stuff to make sure they're there when we come back next year, oftentimes whether I need it or not.
Bearvault is one way to assure your next backcountry trip stays memorable, epic, and safe. Bearvault builds a rugged polycarbonate locking canister that keeps bears and other wild animals away from your food. This in turn keeps your food safe, keeps the bears safe, and keeps you safe. I've got a classic story that I've told a few times about the bear taking my backpack while up in Alaska. I had my lunch and some snacks in there and just went up around the corner to fish for a bit. When I got back, it was totally gone. If I would have had that Bearvault right at that moment, I would have been okay because my food would have been completely sealed. The bear would have had no idea and no reason to take my backpack. So a good reminder there. You might not realize it, but this type of thing happens all the time, even to experienced outdoorsmen. The great news for us is now we can experience the great stuff of a remote trip without ever having to worry about animals fiddling with our stuff. Sleep soundly knowing your vault has sealed the deal for you. Believe it or not, food storage is a key consideration while backcountry hiking, fishing, or camping. The Bearvault also has some great bonus features like the see-through sidewalls so you can find your stuff really easy, and a large opening, plus it doubles as a nice camp stool. This thing is legit. It definitely is this might be my favorite feature is the camp stool. I love a good chair out there. Check in with the crew at Bearvault at wetflyswing.com/Bearvault. That's Bearvault, BEARVAULT. Okay, back to the show.
Yeah, that's the local fly shop, right? We all know how important that is and how cool that is. And that's what's awesome about this is that we've got, I mentioned one, Sugar and River Outfitters is one of our local shops, a part of this event we're doing. Rick Kustich is going to be heading off. We're doing concurrent sessions of this trip this year. So we've got Jeff Liskay in Ohio, Rick Kustich, and he's got a fly shop of his own he's going to be talking about as well. So I think you hit it on the head as far as, the economic engine. You hear that a lot about people don't realize that, wow, the power, yeah, if you can, you don't have to necessarily kill fish or, eat fish. There's a lot of money to be made there, right, through people getting out on the water. And I will say, again, like I mentioned with the fish, you mentioned it with steelhead. So steelhead people are in the Great Lakes loving steelhead. But Jeff Liskay, who's our guide out there, he's fishing for freshwater drum and other species. So I think he's a good example of, you start with one thing, and as you go on your journey, and now people that know him are like, oh, wow, this drum, what is this drum? And so, right, so there's all these different species. And I'm not even sure if freshwater drum is a native species. I'm assuming it is. But is that kind of how you feel that that's part of the journey that is the benefit of what we're talking about here?
Oh, my gosh, it's a hoot what you can catch on a fly. Most people that don't fly fish perceive of fly fishing as a sport for rich old white guys who like to go to Montana and catch trout. And frankly, this is the value of what we do at FFI, right? Because we focus on all fish, all waters, right? We've got clubs in Wichita, Kansas, and Iowa, right?
Right.
We've got 21 clubs in Texas because they focus on all these species. And not only is it a part of the journey that many of us take, like as you just mentioned, the guy that fishes for drum, it's also the value of what it is that we do. And we've really begun to sort of expand our reach and transform, how we engage with the broader fly fishing community. And, part of the reason is so that, we can inspire and engage future fly fishing enthusiasts who may not have trout anywhere near them, but hey man, go cast a fly rod for, the carp in the ditch behind your house. Right. And
Yep.
what I find so funny, and this is me too, is how many guides like in trouty places don't fish for trout. They go carp fishing. Right.
Yeah.
And where I live, right, we've got some really good trout resources, but man, the time of year when the fishing can be good is the windows are pretty small. But you know what we do have? We've got a ton of different species of fish that offer fly fishing opportunities. I've got a buddy, want to give a shout out to Drew Price, who's a guide on Lake Champlain, which, it's 6 miles wide at the widest, 120 miles long. Aside from the Great Lakes, it's the largest freshwater lake in the world, not the world, United States. And we don't go look when I go fishing with Drew. In fact, he texted me right before I jumped on your show about getting out. We're fishing for long-nosed gar and bowfin and carp that are over 30 pounds and are huge in Lake Champlain, and sheep's head, which is what we call freshwater drum here. And man, if you have never caught a freshwater drum on a fly rod, pound for pound, they give smallmouth a run for their money because they're so strong and they're kind of laterally flattened.
Oh, right. Are they kind of they kind of look like a permit a little bit, the head? Or
no? Yeah, actually, yeah. I think they do a little bit. They've got crushers, inside their mouth. And the thing is, when it's August here and it's hot and trout are nowhere to be found, we're sight fishing for drum, carp, gar, bowfin, and whatever else. I mean, 2 weeks ago, I was out with Drew and another buddy of mine. My buddy got a 49-inch long-nosed gar on a fly.
Wow.
He landed a decent bowfin, but lost one that, we could see the fish eat that. Like, we were sight fishing at these fish, probably 12, 15-pound bowfin.
Wow. Yeah, and you're a skiff. Are you in a skiff kind of sight fishing or that sort of thing?
Oh my God, the guy has the greatest boat. He's got a towee that he drove down to Tennessee and if you don't know a towee,
no, what's a towee?
It's a longer. It's honestly, if a canoe and a drift boat had a baby, that's what. Okay, so it's got a flat stern, so he's got a motor. He also has a poling platform. Right. So you can haul ass,
Yeah. It's got a V. It's got a little bit of a V in it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, that's what he uses where he's up sight fishing. And I mean, anybody that's done sight fishing, whether it's saltwater, freshwater, wherever, you realize the guy standing on the platform can see so much better than you in the front, even though you think you're closer. And that's the case. But, sort of circling back to your question, it's a really good example of how fly fishing is evolving in exciting ways that, people are beginning to target, but not target specific fish. People are beginning to realize there's not much you can't catch on a fly rod.
Exactly.
Drew has been, on Lake Champlain, he catches channel cats, on a fly. I mean,
yeah,
huge
pretty
fish.
Cool.
It's super fun.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, I was just thinking we had the Echo fly fishing team on, Tim, Ray, Jeff, and the two guys that purchased the company. He recently sold it, and they were talking about the fishing for carp as well, and using the hot dog bun as their bait, as their fly for carp, which it got me thinking, like, man, these carp, they're not quite that smart. But the funny thing is that, you know what I mean? Like, he was talking about fishing at night and stuff like that. But yeah, that just goes to the thing of like, yeah, you can catch any fish, including giant tarpon, right? These sailfish, all sorts of stuff, which is, I think, keeps it exciting because I'm on that journey. That's where I am in my journey. I mean, I love trout fishing. I just got off the river fishing for trout, but I'm excited to get out there and hit all these species I haven't done, hit yet. So,
well, I can tell you right now, man, I mean, you've got a standing invitation, if you ever want to come out my way, pick the time of year. And in fact, Drew had Blaine chocolate out. I guess it was last year. They'd caught some bowfin. It's a really fun time. And it's a way to catch some different fish.
That's cool. Yeah, I've heard Drew's name definitely before, so that's awesome that you're friends out there. We mentioned, the tarpon that's come up. I'll put some links to the, Bonefish Tarpon Trust and some other groups out there. The episode that just went live today was Monty Burke, who wrote the book Lords of the Fly, right? Which was about the history of the tarpon. That whole crazy thing back in the 70s or whenever that, was, where they pretty much just were going for the giant tarpon and killed a lot of fish, and, it impacted the fishery. And I think now there's other things going on with tarpon, but again, there's a lot of issues. And I think, would you say, like, again, going back to the person listening now, just find that local group, start there, get involved, and then you can take it go as deep as you want to go?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, if you are new to fly fishing, or you're new to your area, or, you're listening to this podcast because you fly fish a little bit, and listen, I got to give you credit. Great episodes, really informative stuff. I love what you're doing out in the Great Lakes coming up here. I really value that I feel like, you add a lot to this sort of, global community in your own way, so you're helping to inspire people also to get involved. But if you take that step to find the local FFI club, these clubs, or your local TU chapter or whatever, right? The folks involved, they got into the sport because they had a passion at some point and they want to share that passion, right? And, especially I know through our FFI clubs, there's this, decade-long history of teaching and mentorship, and we've got a lot of learning resources, no matter what your skill level is. And, people are excited to teach. They're excited to show you, the areas that, need protecting and why they need protecting. And it's just the ability to, again, show up. Listen, most local newspapers, not enough happens on a local level. They're looking for news. So it's not hard to find an announcement about, the Mackenzie River Fly Fishing Club's meeting will happen, at this bar and restaurant at this time. Like, show up. It's fun.
Yeah.
That's the thing too, man. I feel like we forget is like, this is fun, right? This is, the whole sport is supposed to be fun.
Right.
It's not a competition to see who can cast the farthest or catch the biggest fish. It's not about, one-upping your friends or, there's a little bit too much of that stuff, I think, in fly fishing, right? It's about like having a great time, like with your community of people, or, if you walked off the river or got out of the boat, or wherever you are, whatever you're fishing for, and you didn't catch a damn thing and you had a great day, you are doing something right. And that's the important thing to remember. And, I know that this is sort of a standard way to look at it, but when you first get into fly fishing, you just want to catch a fish. Mm-hmm. Then you want to catch a lot of fish. Then you want to catch a big fish. Then you want to catch a lot of big fish. And then you're just happy to go fishing.
Yeah.
Right. That's how you've arrived.
Right. Oh, that's it. So when you're out there on the water and you're like, hey, I'm good. If I don't catch fish today, I'm totally good with it and all that. That's it. That's the point where you're good.
Yeah. And listen, I do think FFI is, the sort of the universally, premier resource for education and teaching people, but good instructors and good mentors are all over the place. Some aren't even affiliated with any organization that you just heard of, and they're outstanding what they're able to teach, impart, inspire, engage. So even if you can't find, a local club or chapter, usually there are, go to your local river. How much time I spent walking up and down rivers, when I first got started, like picking people's brains and asking them questions. And almost all of them were so happy to stop and help me, and I can remember those people and those moments in my journey where somebody took the time to stop, to show me how to do something, to give me some flies and wish me well and send me on my way. Most people are like that. And I think that that's what I would share with your listeners who are, looking to get more involved in this, is to take a leap of faith that people in the fly fishing community, no matter where you go and what you're fishing for, are excited, unless you walk into their hole while they're, fishing, but they're excited to help you. And I'll say one more thing too, for those that are experienced, to remind them, and boy, this took me forever to figure out, probably longer than it should have, which should tell you how immature I am, even at my age. Most people who do dumb stuff don't realize what they're doing. 95% of people. And, it's incumbent upon the people who view themselves as mentors, instead of being like, God, what an idiot. Can you believe how about, hey, listen, buddy, just want to let you know for next time, like, I'm good with it. I'm not in a hurry, but before you back your boat down into the ramp and there's 20 other boats, that's not the time to get the cooler out and rig your rod up, right? Just, hey, get yourself ready. Like, be nice about it. They may tell you to go to hell. They may appreciate it. So those are the two sides. If you're new to this, take a leap of faith that people are welcoming, encouraging, and want to help you. And if you've been around a long time, assume positive intent until you have evidence to the contrary.
Right. Perfect. And I got a couple of just rapid fire questions to take us out of here, if this sounds good. So, so I'm always interested. I'm not sure. Do you listen to any podcasts, or are you more music when you're on the road heading to a trip? What are you doing?
So funny you asked that, because I was just talking to a buddy about this. I do listen to a lot of music, and I tend to try to either escape work by I listen to a ton of podcasts, and it's usually on something that interests me, where I might learn something, like that's outside of my normal professional world, because, sometimes it feels a little bit narrowly focused. So first of all, I don't even know how anybody could go through life without music that fills their soul. And I love that podcasts can inform and inspire, in spite of those that actually misinform and create bad energy.
Right. Exactly. No, that's good. So give us one podcast that you've listened to recently, and one music group or song or something like that.
Oh, man. Boy.
Which one's easier? Is it easier to come up with a song, music, or the podcast?
Music, generally speaking. So first of all, I have a rule about anything in life is I appreciate it if it's authentic, right? Yeah. So, musically, if music is authentic, I will tend to enjoy it. So, I have a passion for everything from like classic country to, good jazz or whatever. But, generally speaking, I'm definitely kind of in the Tyler Childers, Sturgill Simpson, Chris Stapleton kind of groove. I love that. And then I'll shift over to, I love sort of like music you might hear on like college stations, like sort of Americana and independent, music. So, everything from like, good Lord. I mean, I suppose it's somewhere in between, but like, The Head and the Heart, or, I love Jason Isbell, and, I'm trying to think of who I've just sort of pulled out of my playlist, like the Oh Hellos, like random band from Texas. I love those guys. I mean, listen, honestly, like Pandora and Spotify's ability to like tell you what you haven't listened to that's awesome is pretty compelling. Avett Brothers. There you go. Love the Avett Brothers.
Oh, the Avett Brothers.
Oh, they're awesome.
Yeah, perfect. We'll throw a link to YouTube in the show notes to that so people can listen to that, taken away.
I've got an entire playlist dedicated just to my favorite Avett Brothers songs.
Avett, and is that AVID?
AVETT.
Oh, AVETT. Oh, Avett. Yeah, Avett Brothers. Yep. Okay.
Yep. And then I'll give you a podcast. What do I like? I get a kick out of those guys that do SmartLess.
Yeah, me too.
It's not fly fishing. What I find is some celebrities are really boring and some are unbelievably entertaining. And so if you want to listen to one SmartLess episode, which I laughed until I cried, listen to George Clooney.
Oh, George Clooney.
He is the most incredible practical joker.
Oh, he is.
Oh, if you listen to a couple of the stories that he will tell you, they are absolutely disgusting and brilliant. I loved it.
Awesome. I'll put a link to that episode in the show notes. And,
I love it. That's awesome.
Yeah, George. Or I don't think, and I do love SmartLess too. I think Bateman and Will and the three
Sean
guys.
Hayes.
And Sean Hayes. Yeah, they're awesome together. So that's good. So we got a podcast out of you. We got some music. We're building up the show notes here. This is going to be awesome. And I guess, that's kind of, I guess let's leave us with the mentor, because we talked a lot about that. So in your fly fishing space, is there a person out there? You mentioned Currier. You can't think of a bigger person than that, but is there one person that really influenced you in the fly fishing over the years?
Can I give more than one person?
Yeah.
So when I, before the internet, which should tell you that I'm old,
yeah,
I watched Lee Wulff Lefty Kreh and Mel Krieger's videos over and over and over again. But I would say, and these people may not know this, but my casting mentor, absolutely, Howard Cole, owner of High Country Flies back in the 90s. Fly tying mentor, local guy around here, Peter Burton, who was, he really inspired and encouraged me. And by the way, great example of a local guy not looking for any notoriety, who just wanted to share his passion for fly fishing and fly tying. And honestly, it's funny, I'm still friends with him today, but, Tom Rosenbauer's early books and they're still so relevant and they're so well written. And I just appreciate what he does. So there you go. Peter Burton, Howard Cole, Tom Rosenbauer.
There you go. All right, Patrick. Well, I like a lot of these. I feel like we could keep chatting. I'd love to hear about, digging more to the acid rate and stuff. But I think we'll have to leave some of these other questions I have for a future episode. And I think the cool thing is that I think after chatting with you and your team, that I think there'll be some opportunities for us to work together. So I'm excited about that. But thanks for all your the information today. Flyfishersinternational.org, and we'll just go from there.
Thanks so much, Dave. It was really fun being on the show, and I just want to say to folks out there that I feel as though FFI is in a really transformative time in its history with a lot of exciting stuff going on. And so, if you think FFI, check us out. And I think people will really enjoy a lot of the great stuff that we're doing to engage and inspire, fly fishing enthusiasts, anywhere you go and on any fish you catch.
There we go. wetflyswing.com/478. You can head over there right now. Check out a little more in-depth details on what Patrick talked about today. Wetflyswing.com/478 will get you the show notes, and we should have some good links and hopefully some entertaining videos and some good stuff there. Reminder before we get out of here, we launched the big giveaway this year right now. We launched it for the Steelhead Alley School. This is the trip that we did last year, and it was so epic that we are doing it again. And this year we're doubling up, and we're going to be hitting New York and Ohio this year for steelhead. So if you want to check it out right now, wetflyswing.com/giveaway. Just enter your email and name really quick, and you are entered there. If you want to get and actually save a spot right now, we should have hopefully we have a few spots remaining for this trip. Wetflyswing.com/steelhead school will get you to a place where you can enter to get more information on this trip. If you want to purchase a slot, learn more, go there right now, and we will follow up with you by email or by phone. That's what we got. Do we have any fun facts to take away this year? Do we have any fun facts to take away right now? I'm trying to think. Fun facts around the Steelhead School. I will just say I want to go back to last year's Steelhead School, give you a little perspective on what it was like. We went out there, and Jeff, like always, over-delivered, overachiever. We had an amazing trip, had lots of activity, lots of steelhead on the line. We learned some new things. So if you're interested in this, definitely check it out. I'll follow up with you. I'm going to be out there this year. I'm going to be migrating around between the two events, and I'm excited to see everybody who is on the trip this year. And if you don't make the trip, definitely reach out to me and let me know you're interested. We could always follow up at a later point as well. Let's take a look where we're heading. We're wrapping up Steelhead Alley next week. We're going to be doing a live giveaway. If you want to go to wetflyswing.com/live, that'll take you to the page and you can get updated if you entered for this giveaway. On Tuesday, July 25th, we're going to be announcing the winner of this live event, and you can check it out. We're also going to be giving away a few bonuses. We always do that on live events, so if you want another chance to get some of these items, check it out right now. And next week after that, we're hitting the St. Joe. We're getting back into travel. We're heading back to Idaho, and then we're going to circle back around for a little bonus Great Lakes Dude podcast. This is the one where Jeff's going to be talking and interviewing. You don't want to miss that one this week. So we're going to keep this going. We are over halfway now. What do we got? January, February, March, April, May, June, 6 months. So we are well into now the second half of the year, and we've been doing 3 episodes every single week this year. Let me know. I'd love to hear what you think about doing these episodes every week. Are you liking it? Send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com. Or is it overload? Is it too much? My hope is that we do enough content here in episodes that there's something that really meets your needs, even if, not every episode hits you. But if you have a topic idea and you reach out to me, I will not only give you a shout out on this podcast, but I will put that episode together for you. So if there's something we're missing right now, if you've been listening just thinking, man, I love steelhead, or maybe I don't love steelhead, and I would love to hear more about this, that's what this show is all about. It's all about you. So if you reach out to me, I will make it more about you. And I am going to stop talking here because I'm talking a lot. And I just hope you connect with me, like I said, online. Hope to see you on this trip as well. Would love to do a campfire chat with myself and the crew. That's the ultimate wrap-up of the trip every year. We have that campfire chat at the end and just sit back and enjoy the evening, stars, the sky, that environment when you're under it after a trip like this and you're sitting around with Jeff and or Rick and the crew talking about how the week went, all the good stuff we learned. So this is what it's all about. It's hard to express it, obviously, on a podcast, but I would love to see you there. All right, I'm going to get out of here. I hope you are having a great afternoon, a great evening, or a great morning, wherever in the world you are. And I am excited and look forward to talking to you and connecting soon.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.